Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today in this video, we are going to discuss about Azure DevOps board. So in our last video, we have discussed about creation of project. We have created a project and now with the help of that project, we can plan and manage our work. Let's try to understand the Azure board process and team configuration with the help of the ERP application. So for example, we would like to deliver the ERP application and we have certain number of modules which needs to be delivered as part of this ERP. The duration for this ERP application is going to be 2 years from now, and we are supposed to follow the agile methodology and we are going to use the Azure board process. And obviously, as it is going to be a big application, there will be a several number of teams who will be participating or contributing during the development and testing phase of this application. For the start or for the configuration of the process, we have decided to use number of iterations during this development phase. So for an example, we have defined one iteration phase or duration is of 6 months. So we might have 4 different iterations so that we cover all 4 different iterations, cover all the modules in these 4 iterations within the given time frame, which is of 2 years. So in one iteration, we are planning to have 6 sprints. So each sprint would be of duration 1 month. And these are our different modules which we need to deliver. So let's take an example that in the iteration 1, we are going to deliver these 2 modules. So this is how the relationship will look like from the process point of view. And these sprints are going to have certain features would be delivered. So this is what we are looking for in the iteration 1, and so on it will go to the next iteration. So in the iteration 2, we would cover some of the different modules, and at the end of the 4 iteration, we would have the entire ERP deliverable. Now obviously, as we have seen that this is our project or the agile process configuration. Now in this particular process or in these deliverables, we have 2 different teams, and the work or the sprint is shared across these 2 teams like this. So this is our team's configuration looks like. Let me change the color of it. So here is the ERP application. Iteration 1, I have 2 teams, UI and integration team, and then UI team will work on dedicatedly on the sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4 and 5, whereas the integration team will work on the sprint 2 and sprint 5 and 6. You can see that there are certain number of sprints which are dedicated to an individual team, which is in this case sprint 1, 3 and 4 is dedicated to the UI team. There is no collaboration from the integration team required because of the nature of work might be of that kind, wherein just a work required by the UI team, not by the integration team. Whereas we have certain number of sprint planned in which we require to have the contribution from both the team. For example, the sprint 2 and 5 requires the contribution from both UI and the integration team, whereas we also have a sprint 6 which is only dedicated to the integration team in order to complete these 2 modules deliverable. So this is how the typical process you will find in any of your project, and this is just the example simulation which I have tried drawing here in this whiteboard scenario. Now what we are going to do is we are going to configure or trying to simulate the exact same thing into our Azure DevOps project. So let's go to the Azure DevOps project for this. So this is the organization which we are using for throughout our demonstrations. I'm going to create a new project for this within this organization, which we are calling it as an Agile ERP. And process time, a process type, at this time I'm going to select Agile, because in our discussion we mentioned that we would like to follow the Agile process in the development phase or to deliver this project. So let's create a project here. So this is the project is been created. Now if you go to the board section, you have these many menu item which is dedicated to the board. And now if I try to click and create new item drop down, you would see that I'm getting the template or default template which is been provided by Azure DevOps Agile process. Now, before we go ahead and define our backlog or define our work item right from here, let's go and set the process and the team for this particular project, which we have discussed here in this particular section. So for this, what we need first of all iteration to be created. Okay. Then we need 2 different teams and number of sprints to be created. Okay. So I'll go to the project setting. Here in the team, when you create a project, by default you get a team with the same project name. You can create any additional team if you like to. If you want to change the project team setting or team name, you can change it here. So let's call this team as an ERP UI team, because this is going to be our UI team. If you remember from this section, this is our ERP UI team and we have the integration team as well. So we are going to call it as an UI team. Okay. Again, I will create one more team, integration team. So we have 2 teams now. That's the default team and that's the additional team which is going to be contributed. Next, we need to define the iterations. So we'll go to the board settings. Under the board, within the project setting, under the board, you have the project configuration. And here in the ERP, we have different iteration created. Okay. So these are our iteration. If you want to create one more iteration under this project, you can go ahead and create a new iteration. So let's call it as an iteration 4, for example. You can set the start date and end date as well if you like to. This is going to be my iteration. Now here in this iteration, so this is under project configuration, under the iteration tab. So you have 2 different tabs. I hope it is clearly visible. Under the iteration, you can define the iterations. Iterations are nothing, just you can call it iteration or sprint, whatever you want to call. So you can create another child of this particular iteration. For example, let's call it as a sprint. You can also call it, someone may also call the releases instead of iteration. You have the option to go beyond the 2 level. For example, I can create a child of this sprint as well if I want to, but it doesn't make sense at least in our scenario. So let's say we have all the 6 sprint created. So we have 2 teams, we have 4 iterations, and now we have 6 sprint. Okay. Next, you need to go to the area. Here in the area section, you can define different areas. So for example, under the ERP section, let's delete this. So this is my default ERP section. Now here in these, I can create the different area. So what is area? So area, with the help of area, you can determine your team's work, what area, in which area, which team is supposed to contribute. So for example, in our case, I am going to have my UI area, or let's say user interface area, right? I could have another area which is integration. So this is going to be my integration area. This is added inside this part. Okay. So this is what my area looks like. Now the configuration of project is completed. So let's go to the team's configuration. So if you select here on the team's configuration, the default team will be selected. How do you know that? If you look at the top here, the default ERP UI team is selected. So whatever changes you are doing here on this team configuration, you are doing for this UI team configuration. Remember that. Now, if you like to change the configuration for different team, you need to change it from this particular drop-down first. So for now, let's pick the team's configuration for this UI team. So let's go to the iteration tab. Under the iteration tab, we have created these three iteration for our UI team. So what we are saying, our ERP UI team would be contributing to these three iterations. Okay, I hope it makes sense. Next, we go to areas. Now, the UI team will contribute to which area? So obviously, we would like to keep the UI team to contribute onto the ERP section because we have several number of sprint which is going to be shared across. If you look at the diagram again, there are certain number of sprint which are shared between both the teams, which is basically neither of UI team nor of the integration team it is the part of the entire project basically. So both the team we would like to contribute. So that's the reason area we would like to keep it as an ERP. But there are some specific sprint which we would like to contribute only to the UI team. So we are setting this as in this area path as well. So this UI path is going to be dedicated for this particular team. Similarly, if you would like to configure additional template which your team needs to follow, you can configure that kind of a template right from this section, which we'll look into the detail in some other videos. Okay, similarly, I will go to the integration team and perform the same activities. So let's select the different iterations, select all 4 of them. So these are our iterations we have selected. So at the moment we haven't selected any area. So let's select the area and integration as well. So this is what our team's configuration is completed. Now let's go to the Azure DevOps board and see how do you define the requirement or a backlog for the team. So I'm in the work item section. From here, let's create a user story, for example. So user story we are going to create, let's say define. So this is the user story. Now if you look at the template of the user story, you have the title section which we have entered, you have the assignment section in which you are going to assign this user story to one of the member of your team who will be working on this particular user story, but that is going to be after the planning session. But for now you are going to leave it as unassigned because you don't know who will be working on it. Next you have the state which is going to remain new for now, and the point of interest for now is the area. So if you look at the area, by default the ERP, which is the root area, has been selected, and same is the case with the iteration. So the default root iteration path is selected. I can go ahead and change the area depending upon the type of or the nature of the user story. So for example, this is going to be my user story which is related to my iteration 1 or which is iteration 1. So obviously I need to choose a path to iteration 1. Next I need to define the area which team it belongs to. So let's say in this case it is clearly mentioned that we would like to define the UI architecture, so this has to belong to the UI team. I'll save it, and if I go to the backlog section, I'll save it. First of all, I'll save it and look at here. This is how your work item looks like. I'll go to the backlog now. So here in the backlog, you have the option to select the team. For which team you want to set the backlog or define the backlog so that they can start working on the backlog items in the given sprint. Okay. So you have these teams. I'll go to this and select my ERP UI team, and you can see that we have got our user story automatically selected here because of the area path which we have given. Now if I go back to the different team, which is my integration team, I should not have that user story available here. The reason for that is because the user story which we have defined, we have assigned to this particular area path, and this area path is belonging to the UI team, right? And this is what we have configured in our project setting. So now we know which particular team is going to contribute to which requirement or which user story. Let's create one more user story for the integration team. Here in this case, one thing to remember in the selection drop down, this remembers your last selection. So if you have set up last selection as some different thing, like in this case, last time you have selected in the UI, it remembers that, it remembers your choice of which you made it last time. So this time I'm going to change it to the integration because this user story looks like the integration user story. Let's create one more item, and this time we are going to create a shared user story. Let's say define, and you can see that the selection is, it remembers the selection what we had last time. So this time I'm going to say it is at the root level. And if you remember our project configuration, I'll go to the project configuration one more time. Here in the project configuration, under the area, each team has both ERP as a default area. If you look at ERP this and ERP UI team, both the team has the default ERP as a default area. So if I assign a user story to ERP, it means it's going to be the shared user story which will be worked upon by both the team. And if you look at these sprint, in the sprint 2, we have the user stories which is supposed to be worked upon both the team. If you look at here under the iteration, both the teams should be supposed to work on this particular user story. Similarly, as per our design, I'll go to the integration, and within the integration, which sprint it was dedicated to this. So sprint 6, for example. So let's select this as in sprint 6. So this is our backlog ready. Now if I go to the backlog, so integration team has two user story, one which is common across. As you can see, it is shared by both the team. It is shared by both of the team, and it is shared, and this is the dedicated user story. Similarly, if I go to the UI, ERP UI, it has got two different user stories, one which is shared and the other one is dedicated to the particular team, right? Now if I go to the board, you have the same board available wherein you can see just the different structure which you can check the UI of the current progress of the user story or your work item type, depending upon the type which you are looking at. If you are looking at the feature wise, you can go ahead and select from this, but it is the same. It's just you can track the progress from the board. This is nothing, just our Kanban board. Okay, so this is how you define and configure your team's work. You can see that in the planning section, we are able to look at the different iteration which we are working right now. And the same thing you can look at inside your sprint as well. I hope you understood the concept of configuring your project settings and the team configuration and planning your work for your project with the help of Azure DevOps board with the process type, let's say basic, agile, or any other type which are available. In the next videos, we are going to look at how do you use the different process type, for example, basic, agile, CMMI, and the other types. We'll also look at how do you define your sprint and how your users or the developers are going to contribute to the sprint, and what are the best practice to work on this sprint in terms of working with Agile using the Azure DevOps board. I hope you are finding this helpful. If it is, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video.